Before we begin, tell me in the comments. How old are you? Where are you from? And are you currently in a relationship or interested in someone? You never know. Your story might help someone else feel a little less alone. And one click on the subscribe button is a huge motivation for me to keep creating meaningful stories like this. The day I decided to hide my fortune was the day I learned that money can buy almost anything except certainty about who truly cares about you. My name is Olivia Bennett, and at 47 years old, I owned one of the largest hospitality companies on the West Coast. According to every business magazine in America, I was successful. According to my bank account, I was wealthy beyond anything I had imagined when I was younger. But according to my heart, I was exhausted. Over the years, I had watched people change the moment they learned who I was. New friendships suddenly felt strategic. Invitations appeared out of nowhere. Compliments sounded rehearsed. Even relationships became complicated. I could never tell whether someone liked me or liked the life they imagined I could give them. After my last breakup, that feeling only became worse. The woman I had trusted most spent months talking about our future together. Then, the moment she thought a merger might threaten my financial position, she disappeared. The experience left a scar I could not ignore. So I came up with an unusual plan. One of my company's luxury resorts sat on the Oregon coast overlooking miles of beautiful shoreline. The property employed hundreds of people, welcomed thousands of guests every year, and generated millions of dollars in revenue. Most importantly, almost nobody there knew what I looked like in person. I had spent years avoiding publicity. My executives handled interviews while I stayed behind the scenes. That anonymity suddenly became useful. Instead of arriving as the owner, I arrived as a housekeeping trainee. I traded tailored executive suits for a simple uniform. I left my private driver behind. I used my middle name on paperwork. For the first time in decades, nobody treated me like a CEO. The experiment began surprisingly well. During my first few hours, I pushed supply carts through hallways, changed linens, and tried very hard not to reveal that I technically owned the building around me. Then reality arrived. A wealthy guest stopped me outside one of the ocean view suites. She looked me up and down before handing me an empty coffee cup without even making eye contact. "Take care of this," she said. No greeting. No thank you. Just an order. I forced a smile and accepted the cup. A few minutes later, the same guest began complaining loudly because her room was not ready early. Several employees tried to help, but nothing seemed good enough. The entire scene made my stomach sink. Was this how some people treated workers every day? Then I heard another voice. Calm, kind, confident. "Ma'am, we are doing everything possible to help you, and I promise your room will be ready shortly." I turned toward the speaker. A woman wearing the same housekeeping uniform stood beside me. She had warm eyes, a sincere smile, and an energy that immediately changed the atmosphere around her. The guest finally walked away, still grumbling. The woman looked at me and laughed softly. "First day?" she asked. "Is it that obvious?" I replied. "Only because I looked exactly the same on mine." Then she extended her hand. "I am Emma Carter." In that moment, standing in a resort hallway with a cleaning cart beside me and ocean waves crashing beyond the windows, I had no idea that meeting Emma Carter was about to change everything I thought I knew about trust, honesty, and love. Emma spent the rest of that morning showing me how to survive a job that I had completely underestimated. Before arriving at the resort, I had convinced myself that housekeeping was simple. Change sheets, clean rooms, smile at guests. By lunchtime, I realized how wrong I had been. Every room required attention to dozens of small details. Every guest had different expectations. Every minute seemed carefully scheduled. Yet Emma moved through it all with a calm confidence that made the impossible look easy. "You are thinking too much," she told me after watching me struggle to organize a supply cart. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "You keep checking your list every 30 seconds. I laughed. Old habit. What I did not tell her was that I normally managed billion-dollar budgets and hundreds of executives. Somehow organizing towels felt more stressful. Emma grinned and adjusted a stack of folded linens. "Trust yourself a little." The words stayed with me longer than they should have. Throughout the day, I watched her interact with people. An elderly guest dropped a bag near the lobby entrance. Emma immediately helped pick up the contents and carried everything to the woman's room. A nervous new employee accidentally mixed up assignments. Emma quietly fixed the mistake without embarrassing her. A maintenance worker looked exhausted after a long shift, and Emma brought him a cup of coffee without being asked. None of these actions were dramatic. None earned recognition. Yet she performed them naturally, as if kindness required no effort at all. By late afternoon, we were replacing towels in an oceanfront suite when she glanced at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you take this job?" My heart nearly stopped. The question itself was harmless, but I suddenly became aware of how fragile my entire experiment was. "I needed a change," I said carefully. Emma studied me for a moment. "That sounds like the answer people give when they do not want to tell the truth." I almost laughed from the accuracy of it. Maybe I am still figuring it out myself. To my relief, she nodded. "Fair enough." We finished the room in comfortable silence. Outside the windows, waves crashed against the rocky shoreline while seabirds drifted above the water. It was beautiful in a way that my office never was. 4 years my days had been filled with conference calls, acquisition meetings, and financial reports. Here people worried about clean rooms and guest satisfaction. The simplicity felt refreshing. During our break, Emma and I sat on a bench overlooking the beach. The salty air carried the sound of distant waves. "How long have you worked here?" I asked. "Almost 7 years." 7 years. She nodded. "Long enough to know where every problem hides." "You must love it." A small smile appeared. "Some days." There was something in her expression that suggested a deeper story. "And the other days?" I asked. She looked toward the ocean. "The other days I remember why I need the paycheck." The honesty surprised me. Most people around me spent their lives pretending everything was perfect. Emma never seemed interested in pretending. "Family?" I asked gently. "My mother." She nodded. "Medical bills. Rent. Life." The simplicity of the answer somehow made it more powerful. For a moment I felt almost guilty. A single hour of my investment portfolio could probably cover expenses that kept her awake at night. Yet she carried those burdens with far more grace than many wealthy people I knew. As the sun began sinking toward the horizon, my phone vibrated inside my pocket. Only one person had that private number. My chief operating officer. I ignored the call immediately. Emma noticed. "Important?" she asked. "Not today," I replied. She smiled. "Good answer." And for the first time in years I realized it was true. By the third day I had developed a routine. Wake up before sunrise. Put on the housekeeping uniform. Pretend I was not responsible for the quarterly earnings of the company that owned the resort. The first 2 parts were surprisingly easy. The third required constant effort. Every hour brought new opportunities to accidentally reveal who I really was. Yet somehow being around Emma made it easier. She had a way of pulling people into the present moment. When she was focused on a task, nothing else seemed to matter. That morning, we were assigned to prepare a group of premium oceanfront suites before the arrival of several VIP guests. The workload was heavy, and the entire staff moved quickly through the hallways. Despite the pressure, Emma remained calm. "You know," she said while folding fresh towels, "you are improving." That sounds dangerously close to a compliment. "Do not get too excited." She smiled. "You still organize supplies like a person who has never seen a cleaning cart before." I laughed. Fair criticism. We spent most of the morning working side by side. The more time I spent with her, the more fascinated I became. Emma never seemed concerned with impressing anyone. She was simply herself. In a world where I constantly questioned people's motives, that quality felt rare. During lunch, we sat outside overlooking the ocean. The sky was clear, and sunlight reflected across the water in shimmering patterns. Several employees chatted nearby while gulls drifted overhead. Emma opened a small container filled with homemade pasta and glanced toward me. "Can I ask another question? You ask surprisingly dangerous questions." "Occupational talent." I smiled. "Go ahead." She rested her elbows on the table. "If money were not a concern, what would you do?" The question caught me off guard. Most people asked what I did. Very few asked what I wanted. I looked toward the horizon. I would probably buy a small cottage somewhere on the Maine coast. Emma blinked. "Maine. Quiet beaches. Cold mornings." Nobody asking for meetings. She laughed softly. That sounds oddly specific. I have thought about it. In reality, I had done more than think about it. 2 years earlier, I had actually purchased a beautiful waterfront cottage outside Camden, Maine. It had become my private escape whenever the pressure of corporate life became overwhelming. Yet in that moment I heard myself say something different. Actually, I added casually, I never ended up buying one. Emma nodded and accepted the answer without question. The conversation moved on. The small lie felt harmless. At the time I barely noticed it. Looking back, I should have. Later that afternoon, we were cleaning a suite when a supervisor approached with a clipboard. Emma, there is a guest in room 418 asking for assistance. I will be right there. As soon as she left, my phone vibrated. Only 3 people possessed that private number. This time it was my chief operating officer again. I stepped into the empty hallway and answered quietly. What is so urgent? The board wants confirmation about next month's inspection schedule. Handle it. They are asking specifically about the internal audit. I closed my eyes briefly. Even hundreds of miles away, corporate life continued chasing me. Use your judgment. Olivia, use your judgment, I repeated before ending the call. When I returned, Emma was standing near the supply cart with a curious expression. Everything okay? She asked. Just an old friend. The lie came too easily. For a moment, guilt flickered through me. Emma deserved honesty. Yet the entire purpose of this experiment depended on secrecy. That evening, after our shift ended, I sat alone in the small employee apartment the resort had assigned me. A notebook rested on the table in front of me. Every night I recorded observations about the people around me, who treated others with respect, who changed behavior based on status, who seemed genuine. Over the past 3 days, one name appeared more often than any other. Emma Carter. Beside her name, I wrote the same word I had written every night since arriving. Authentic. Then I closed the notebook, unaware that one small lie about a cottage in Maine would eventually become far more important than I ever imagined. The following week introduced a new complication to my carefully constructed experiment. An internal compliance inspector arrived at the resort. Officially, the visit was routine. Unofficially, I knew exactly why she was there. 3 months earlier, I had personally authorized a series of surprise evaluations across several company properties. The inspector reported directly to headquarters and ultimately to me. The irony of pretending not to know her was not lost on me. Her name was Rebecca Sloan, and she had spent nearly a decade uncovering inefficiencies, policy violations, and management problems throughout my company. The moment I saw her step through the front entrance carrying a leather portfolio, I knew several department managers were about to have a stressful week. Emma, however, seemed completely unconcerned. Everyone gets nervous when inspectors show up, she said while arranging fresh linens in a storage room. Why? I asked. Because people always assume they have done something wrong. Have you? Emma looked genuinely confused. No, then why worry? She laughed softly. Exactly. That answer stayed with me. So many executives I worked with spent their lives protecting themselves from scrutiny. Emma simply focused on doing her job well. Throughout the day, rumors spread across the resort. Employees whispered in hallways. Supervisors reviewed procedures repeatedly. Managers suddenly became very interested in details they normally ignored. The atmosphere reminded me of corporate board meetings before earnings reports. Different setting. Same behavior. Late that afternoon, Rebecca unexpectedly approached me near the laundry department. Fortunately, nobody else stood close enough to hear us. Ms. Bennett, she said quietly, please do not call me that. Understood. Her expression remained professional. I have completed the first phase of the inspection. And overall operations are strong. She hesitated. There is something else. My stomach tightened slightly. What? One employee continues appearing in reports. I immediately knew who she meant. Emma Carter? Rebecca nodded. Guests mention her by name repeatedly. Staff members trust her. Supervisors praise her work ethic. A small smile appeared despite my efforts to remain neutral. That does not sound like a problem. It is not. Rebecca glanced around before lowering her voice. It is unusual. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Rebecca immediately stepped away and adopted a more formal posture. Emma appeared carrying folded sheets. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just an inspection question," Rebecca replied smoothly. Emma nodded and continued working without suspicion. The moment passed. Yet I found myself thinking about Rebecca's observation for the rest of the evening. Emma's influence extended far beyond simple job performance. People trusted her, respected her, felt comfortable around her. The more I observed, the more remarkable it seemed. 2 days later, that realization deepened. A severe storm moved across the coastline during the night. Strong winds rattled windows while heavy rain battered the resort. Several employees struggled to reach work because of road closures. Staffing shortages created chaos throughout the property. Despite the pressure, Emma volunteered to cover additional shifts. She helped housekeeping, assisted front desk staff, and even delivered meals to elderly guests who preferred staying in their rooms during the storm. Not once did she complain. Near the end of the day, I found her standing beside a large window overlooking the ocean. Massive waves crashed against the rocks below. "You have been working for nearly 12 hours, I said. "Someone had to help." "Most people would have gone home." Emma shrugged. "Most people are probably smarter than I am." I laughed. "I doubt that." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain streaked across the glass while thunder rolled in the distance. The resort felt strangely peaceful despite the storm outside. Then Emma looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "You know something?" "What?" "You are different than when you arrived." "Different how?" She considered the question carefully. "Less guarded." The observation caught me completely off guard. As she was right. Somewhere between changing linens, sharing lunches, and watching her kindness affect everyone around her, I had started lowering walls I did not even realize I carried. And that realization was far more dangerous to my experiment than any inspector could ever be. Over the next several days, something changed between Emma and me. Not dramatically, not all at once. It happened through small moments that would have seemed insignificant to anyone else. Shared lunches during busy shifts. Quiet conversations while preparing rooms. The familiar comfort of seeing her smile at the beginning of each day. Before arriving at the resort, my life had been carefully scheduled down to the minute. Every conversation had a purpose. Every meeting had an agenda. With Emma, things felt different. Simpler. One afternoon we were assigned to prepare a private beachfront cottage reserved for an upcoming guest. The cottage sat several hundred yards away from the main resort buildings, surrounded by windswept dunes and overlooking the Pacific Ocean. As we worked, sunlight poured through large windows and filled the rooms with a warm golden glow. "If you could live anywhere," Emma asked while arranging fresh flowers on a dining table, "where would it be?" I laughed softly. We already established that I apparently dream about coastal property. "True." She smiled. "But I am curious." I looked out toward the waves. "Somewhere quiet." "That is all. Somewhere nobody expects anything from me." For a moment Emma stopped what she was doing. "That sounds lonely." The observation surprised me. "Maybe. Or maybe you just spend too much time carrying other people's expectations." I stared at her. The comment felt uncomfortably accurate. "You say things like that often?" "Only when people need to hear them." We both laughed. Yet the conversation stayed with me long after it ended. That evening after our shift, several employees gathered around a fire pit near the beach. Someone brought coffee. Someone else brought snacks. The atmosphere was casual and relaxed. I almost declined the invitation out of habit. Then Emma convinced me to stay. We spent hours listening to stories, laughing at bad jokes, and watching waves roll across the shoreline beneath a sky full of stars. At one point, Emma sat beside me on a driftwood log while the others talked nearby. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The silence felt comfortable, peaceful. "Can I tell you something?" she asked eventually. "Of course." She stared toward the ocean. "When you first arrived, I thought you would quit within a week." I laughed so hard that several people turned to look at us. "That bad?" "Much worse." "Thank you for your honesty." "You are welcome." Her smile widened. But I was wrong. The words carried unexpected warmth. "Why?" I asked quietly. Emma considered the question. Because underneath all the overthinking and awkward supply cart organization, you are actually pretty resilient. My heart reacted before my mind could catch up. It was not what she said. It was how sincerely she said it. For years, compliments had often felt attached to my title, my influence, or my success. This felt different. She was talking about me. Not the version of me the world knew. The version she believed she had discovered. And for the first time since beginning this experiment, I realized something unsettling. I was no longer simply observing Emma. I was starting to care what she thought of me. That realization should have worried me. Instead, sitting beside her beneath a sky full of stars while ocean waves echoed through the darkness, it felt surprisingly right. The next morning began like every other day since I arrived at the resort, but by sunset everything had changed. First, the shift felt ordinary. Guests checked in. Rooms needed preparation. Managers hurried between meetings. Yet beneath the familiar routine, I carried a growing awareness that my feelings toward Emma were becoming impossible to ignore. I had started this experiment to learn whether people could be trusted. Somewhere along the way, I stopped focusing on everyone else and started paying attention to one person. That realization followed me throughout the morning. Around noon, Emma and I were assigned to organize inventory records in a storage office behind the main housekeeping department. It was tedious work involving supply logs, replacement schedules, and purchase requests. Normally, neither of us would have volunteered for such a task. But the office offered something rare. Uninterrupted quiet. For nearly an hour we worked side by side sorting paperwork. Occasionally our conversations drifted from work to personal stories. Emma told me about growing up in a small Oregon town. I shared carefully edited versions of my own experiences, removing every detail that might reveal the truth. The lies were becoming more difficult to manage. Every meaningful conversation required another omission. Every honest moment contained hidden boundaries. "You are doing it again," Emma suddenly said. I looked up from a stack of files. "Doing what?" "Thinking too hard." I laughed. "You really notice everything." "Not everything." She smiled. "Just the important things." Before I could respond, a supervisor entered carrying several folders. "These need to go to administration." She placed them on a nearby desk and quickly left again. Emma immediately returned to organizing inventory sheets while I reached for the folders. That simple decision changed everything. One folder slipped from the stack and fell to the floor. Several documents scattered across the room. I bent down to collect them. Then my stomach dropped. Printed across the top page was the logo of Bennett Holdings. Beneath it appeared a list of ownership records connected to the resort. My name sat prominently at the top. Olivia Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. For one terrifying second I simply stared. How had this file ended up here? It should have remained inside corporate administration. My pulse accelerated instantly. I gathered the papers as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, I was not fast enough. "Olivia." Emma's voice sounded confused. I looked up. She was standing beside me. Her eyes had already moved to the document in my hands. Silence filled the room. The world seemed to stop moving. I wanted to explain everything immediately. I wanted to tell the truth before assumptions could form. But no words came. Emma carefully took the top page and read it again. Then she looked at me. Not angry. Not yet. Just stunned. "What is this?" she asked quietly. My mind searched desperately for an answer that did not exist. "Emma, I can explain." The moment the sentence left my mouth, I knew it was the wrong thing to say. People only say that when explanations arrive too late. She looked back at the paperwork, then at me again. "You own this resort?" I closed my eyes briefly. There was no point denying it anymore. "Yes." Another silence followed. "You are the CEO?" "Yes." Her expression changed. Not because of the money. Not because of the title. I could see the hurt arriving before she spoke. "How long were you planning to keep pretending?" Every word landed harder than I expected. It was not supposed to happen like this. Then how was it supposed to happen? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because I did not have an answer. Weeks of friendship, trust, and shared moments suddenly stood between us and the truth I had hidden from the beginning. Emma placed the document back onto the desk. Her hands remained remarkably steady. Mine did not. "I need some air," she said softly. Then she turned and walked out of the office. The door closed behind her. I stood alone among scattered paperwork and inventory reports, staring at the empty doorway. For the first time since arriving at the resort, I was no longer afraid that people would discover who I really was. I was afraid that the one person who mattered already had. For the rest of that afternoon, I barely accomplished anything. Every hallway reminded me of Emma. Every guest interaction felt mechanical. Every attempt to focus ended with me replaying the expression on her face when she discovered the truth. By evening, I finally found her sitting alone on a wooden bench overlooking the beach. The sun was beginning to set, painting the ocean in shades of gold and orange. Normally, she would have smiled when she saw me approaching. This time she simply looked back toward the water. "Emma." My voice sounded uncertain even to me. She nodded politely. "Olivia." Hearing my real name from her lips should have felt relieving. Instead, it hurt. I sat down several feet away, giving her space. For a while, neither of us spoke. The waves filled the silence between us. Finally, she broke it. "How long?" I already knew what she meant. "Since the day I arrived." She closed her eyes briefly. "So every conversation we had started with a lie." "Not every conversation." The words came out too quickly. "Emma, what I felt was real." She looked at me then. Not angrily. Disappointed. Somehow that was worse. "You know what is strange?" she asked softly. "I never cared about money." "I know. I never cared about titles either." Her eyes searched mine. "But I cared about honesty." I looked away. Because there was nothing I could say that would change that truth. "I started this because I did not trust people," I admitted. "That does not make it better." "I know." "Do you?" Her voice remained calm, but emotion lingered beneath every word. "Because from where I am sitting, it feels like you spent weeks deciding whether everyone else was trustworthy enough for you." The observation hit with painful accuracy. I had no defense. "You are right," I said quietly. Emma stared toward the ocean again. I kept wondering why certain things never made sense. My stomach tightened. "What things?" "The phone calls." She gave a sad laugh. "The way managers always seemed nervous around you without understanding why. The way you sometimes knew things before anyone else." I remembered dozens of small moments I had overlooked. Clues hidden in plain sight. "I should have told you." "Yes." The answer came immediately. Another silence settled between us. Farther down the beach, several guests walked near the shoreline. The world continued moving while my own seemed suspended. "There is something else," Emma said eventually. "What?" "I trusted you." Her voice softened. "More than I expected to." Those words carried enough weight to make my chest ache. Because I knew exactly what she meant. "Emma, do not." She shook her head gently. "Please do not make this harder." For the first time since meeting her, I felt completely powerless. Board meetings, acquisitions, financial crises. I knew how to solve those problems. This was different. There was no strategy for repairing a broken trust. "I never wanted to hurt you," I said. "I believe that." She stood from the bench and wrapped her arms around herself against the cool evening breeze. "But you still did." The honesty of the statement left no room for argument. She looked out toward the horizon one final time before turning back toward the resort. "I need some distance, Olivia." My heart sank. "For how long?" A sad smile appeared. "I do not know." Then she walked away. I remained on the bench long after she disappeared from sight. The sunset eventually faded. The beach grew darker. Yet I barely noticed. Because for the first time since beginning my experiment, I understood something important. I had spent years afraid that people only valued me because of my fortune. What I never considered was that hiding the truth could cost me the one person who valued me despite it. And as I sat there listening to the waves roll onto the shore, I realized that losing Emma mattered more than any lesson I had hoped to learn. The days that followed were some of the longest I could remember. Emma kept her promise about distance. She remained professional during shifts, polite when necessary, and completely unavailable for the conversations I desperately wanted to have. Every hallway that once felt welcoming now felt empty. Worse, the consequences of my experiment were no longer limited to one relationship. News about the undercover evaluation somehow reached a local business reporter. Within 48 hours, the story spread across multiple publications. Headlines questioned my judgment. Commentators debated whether the entire project had been ethical. Employees across several properties expressed frustration. Some felt betrayed. Others felt embarrassed. The situation escalated faster than anyone at headquarters anticipated. By the end of the week, I returned to Seattle for an emergency board meeting. Sitting in the executive conference room felt strangely unreal after spending weeks cleaning guest rooms. Several board members were visibly upset. Others seemed more concerned about public perception than the actual issue. "You turned yourself into the story," one director complained. "The company is taking unnecessary criticism." Another executive shook his head. "This never should have happened. Normally I would have defended myself. This time I remained quiet. Because deep down, I knew they were discussing symptoms rather than the real problem. The real problem was trust. The same issue that had driven me to begin the experiment in the first place. After the meeting ended, I found myself standing alone in my office overlooking Elliott Bay. The city stretched beneath gray clouds while ferries crossed the water below. My phone rested on the desk beside me. For nearly an hour, I stared at Emma's contact information without calling. Then a memory surfaced unexpectedly. A conversation from weeks earlier. A small cottage on the Maine coast. I remembered telling Emma I had never purchased it. The thought lingered longer than it should have. Later that evening, while sorting through personal documents, I opened a file connected to the property. Inside sat photographs, maintenance records, and ownership paperwork. Then I froze. The purchase date stared back at me. 2 years earlier. Exactly as I remembered. Yet something else caught my attention. A transfer agreement dated 6 months later. I read the document twice. Then a third time. My stomach tightened. The cottage was no longer legally mine. It had been transferred into a private charitable housing trust that funded temporary residences for families facing medical crises. I remembered authorizing the donation. I remembered signing the paperwork. Yet somehow weeks earlier, I had instinctively thought of the property as if I still owned it. The realization unsettled me. Not because of the cottage itself. Because it exposed something uncomfortable. Emma believed I had lied repeatedly and intentionally. But at least one of the details haunting my memory was not as simple as it appeared. The next morning brought another surprise. Rebecca Sloan arrived at my office carrying several folders. "You need to see this," she said. Inside were employee surveys collected after the story became public. Most responses criticized the experiment. A few defended it. Then I noticed one particular statement. The name had been removed, but I recognized the writing style immediately. The comment read, "I do not think the problem was that she was wealthy. I think the problem was that she forgot trust works both ways." I stared at the sentence for a long time, because it sounded exactly like something Emma would say. Not cruel. Not angry. Honest. Rebecca watched me carefully. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked out the window toward the city. For weeks I had been trying to fix consequences, manage headlines, control narratives, solve problems. Suddenly the answer felt obvious. I am going to stop hiding. Rebecca nodded slowly. About time. 3 days later, headquarters announced a company-wide shareholder summit. Reporters expected damage control. Investors expected explanations. Executives expected carefully prepared statements. None of them knew I had already made a different decision. Because for the first time since this entire story began, I was no longer interested in protecting my reputation. I was interested in telling the truth. All of it. The shareholder summit took place inside the largest convention center our company had ever rented. Thousands of investors, executives, employees, and reporters filled the enormous hall. Cameras lined the back walls. Television crews waited near the stage. Financial analysts occupied entire sections of seating. Everyone expected a carefully controlled corporate response. They expected statistics, forecasts, public relations language. What they received was something entirely different. I stood backstage listening to the noise of the crowd beyond the curtains. For the first time in years I felt nervous. Not because of shareholders. Not because of headlines. Because somewhere in that audience sat the one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. Earlier that morning, I had sent Emma a message. No explanations. No excuses. Just an invitation to hear the truth directly from me. I had no idea whether she would come. When my name was announced, the room erupted into polite applause. I walked onto the stage and stood beneath bright lights. The massive screens behind me displayed the company logo. For a moment, I simply looked out at the crowd. Then I set aside the prepared speech. A murmur spread through the audience. For most of my career, I believed success meant having the right answers. The room fell quiet. When problems appeared, I solved them. When challenges emerged, I managed them. When trust became difficult, I tried to control the situation instead of earning it. Reporters immediately started typing. Cameras focused more closely. Several months ago, I made a decision that affected people throughout this company. I told myself I was searching for honesty. I told myself I was trying to understand who could be trusted. I paused. The truth is that I was afraid. The admission hung in the air. I was afraid of being valued for the wrong reasons. Afraid of being misunderstood. Afraid of being disappointed. The room remained silent. And because of that fear, I forgot something important. I looked across the audience. Trust is not something we test in other people. Trust is something we offer ourselves. I saw employees exchanging glances. Board members sitting perfectly still. Journalists leaning forward. I heard people who deserved honesty from the beginning. For that, I am deeply sorry. The apology felt different from every corporate statement I had ever delivered. As this one was real. Then I took a breath and continued. There is one more thing I need to correct. A large image appeared behind me on the screen. A photograph of a small waterfront cottage overlooking the Maine coast. Confused murmurs spread through the room. Weeks ago, I told someone that I never purchased this cottage. I smiled faintly. The truth is that I did buy it. Then 6 months later, I donated it to a charitable housing trust. Somewhere along the way, my memory and my guilt became tangled together. I shook my head. That may sound like a small detail. But small details matter when honesty is involved. Then I stepped away from the podium. The audience watched in confusion. Instead of continuing the presentation, I walked down the stairs from the stage and into the crowd. My heart pounded with every step. I moved past investors, past executives, past reporters. Then I saw her. Emma sat several rows from the front. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I stopped beside her seat. Thousands of people watched. Hundreds of cameras pointed in our direction. Yet somehow it felt like we were the only two people in the room. You once told me that I carried other people's expectations, I said softly. Emma smiled despite herself. I remember. You were right. I took a breath. And you were right about something else. Her eyes searched mine. What is that? Trust works both ways. The corners of her eyes softened. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she stood. You finally figured it out. Laughter rippled through the audience. Mine mixed with hers. It was the first truly easy moment we had shared in weeks. I am a slow learner, I admitted. Clearly. We both smiled. The tension that had followed us for so long seemed to loosen all at once. Not because every problem had disappeared. Not because the past no longer mattered. But because the truth finally stood where secrecy used to be. Emma reached for my hand. I held hers without hesitation. Around us, applause slowly began spreading through the hall. Then it grew louder. And louder still. For once I barely noticed. Because the lesson I had spent months searching for was standing right in front of me. I had hidden my fortune to discover who could be trusted. Instead, I discovered that the greatest risk was allowing someone to know me completely. And the greatest reward was finding someone who stayed anyway. If this story touched your heart, comment the number 8.